Okay, good morning, everyone. We're about to begin. We just want to get the crowd settled. Good morning. Always one of the highlights of the year, Austrian Economics Research Conference. So, without further ado, here's me, Institute President Jeff DEIST. Sorry. Without further ado, we have Tom Woods.
See, it's not true that Mexicans steal our jobs. Tho just stole my job, introducing Jeff DEIST here. All right, anyway, welcome everybody. Delighted to see everybody here. What can I say about Jeff DEIST? Well, the Mises Institute needed a president. Jeff was available. No, we all know Jeff is a truly great man. He was the very last chief of staff for
everybody this morning. We're really very, very grateful to have all of you here. And with the last year that we've all had, just simple things like conferences and travel and the social element of being together with like-minded people, I think. So it was actually about almost exactly a year ago. We were right here and we were in the midst of this unfolding coronavirus panic. And many things which are clear now, in hindsight, were not so clear last March. And as we started to understand what was going on, it reminded me of the days after 9/11, if you recall that sort of fog of war, in the sense that we weren't so much worried about the virus, we were worrying about what government was going to do. And I think that's turned out to be true. So, not surprisingly, government acted in what we might say is an atavistic manner. So the response from politicians was to apply the oldest technology in the book, namely quarantines and lockdowns, even to perfectly healthy people. So that's the difference, the first time in human history. So college administrators, being the timid types that they are, soon followed suit, and we found out and began to realize that a lot of our keynote speakers and presenters would be unable to travel or to attend. So really for the first time, the only time since its inception in the 1980s, we were forced to cancel our research conference last year. And so we're thrilled to hold it this year, but still muted in a sense that our Asian, Brazilian, and European colleagues are unable to join us and hold some of the panels that we were very much looking forward to. But nonetheless, as far as last year goes, we're very proud as an organization that we continued to hold live events throughout the year after that. They were all very well attended. Eagerly attended. We were perhaps the only organization of our kind, of our type in the United States to do so last year. And honestly, some of those events almost felt like dissident gatherings because we had to sort of work around various venues and various restrictions and that sort of thing, but nonetheless we were able to do it. So one important lesson from 2020, I think, was the benefit of owning a physical brick and mortar facility like this, because it gave us the ability to not only host events, but it really served as an oasis for us. And we've been very fortunate in Auburn that we were able to come here without masks and distancing and all that sort of thing. So the Institute itself has taken on new meaning in that sense. As far as this conference goes, it's unique. It's very interesting to me as a layperson to listen to some of the scholarship and get some of these ideas. But it's really about promoting and continuing the tradition of economic theory, which we, of course, believe is actually the primary job for economists. You might not know that. That's the idea behind this conference. But if you spend much time reading what I guess we could call pop economics, which is what takes place, you're familiar with FinTwit, financial Twitter, econ Twitter, the kind of stuff you read in Bloomberg Opinion, Paul Krugman's blog in the New York Times. We could sort of put all that together and call it pop economics. If you spend any time reading pop economics, you'll find very quickly that theory is viewed rather dismissively and that data is viewed reverentially. And so everything starts with the numbers. We got to look at the numbers, and then we work backward from there to reverse engineer an explanation for the numbers. And there's actually a related, I guess we could call it a controversy around this in the world of critical theory. Some of you may have followed that there was a sort of a kerfuffle for a period on Twitter about this idea that 2 + 2 = 5. And the idea behind this was that, reality is not as objective as the sort of rationalist Enlightenment people have led us to believe, and we have to rethink all of this in the brave new world of America. So I think 2 + 2 = 5. There is an analogy here with economics, and it's fitting in a sense because so many economists seem to want to be mathematicians. But we've witnessed the wholesale injection of identity and personal experience into math, into mathematics. And if we think that's not coming for economics, I think we're crazy. So what 2 + 2 = 5, it asserts that we can no longer simply say, well, math, Jeff, is an abstract science which describes an existing underlying reality. Well, no. Instead, we have to say, well, whether 2 + 2 = 4 actually depends. It depends on your identity, maybe, or where you're from, or your life experiences, or the color of your skin, or your personal form of logic. There's actually a guy named James Lindsay, who's a mathematician, whom Tom Woods has interviewed on his show, who really done some heroic work combating this idiocy on Twitter, and took a lot of grief for it. But I think it's filtering through, and there was recently an article by Niall Ferguson in Bloomberg. He has been hired to do a bi-weekly opinion column, generally on economics, for Bloomberg Opinion. And this is just a couple weeks ago. It was called "The Fed Doesn't Fear Inflation, Its Critics Have Longer Memories." So I said, well, this sounds like a good article. I like the title anyway. And of course, Ferguson, for those who follow him, is a brilliant, very interesting guy, mostly a historian in his day job. He's actually good on World War I, which is interesting. He's bad on Kissinger. Okay. But he had some important skirmishes with Paul Krugman back around 2013 over what quantitative easing was going to do and whether the financial crisis made the case for austerity. Krugman, of course, vociferously offered the other case. And so the left attacked him soundly back in that period. And at the time, of course, the slur was that he's a neoliberal. That's 2013, which might as well be 100 years ago. I think today he's probably been upgraded to fascist. But nonetheless, as I read this article about inflation, hopefully, it seems that he's gun-shy maybe from his public experience with Krugman. The whole article was an experience about fretting about the data. We can't actually know whether the insane machinations of Jerome Powell and company in 2020 will be a bad thing or not. We have to kind of wait and look for the numbers. Maybe 2 + 2 will = 5 this time around. That's the sense you got from the article. And this is from Niall Ferguson, who's, again, a brilliant man. We can't know anything definitively. We can hold a set of assumptions, but they can just be proven or disproven away by the next crash or the next boom. That's the takeaway. And that's why all of you are so important in this room. Someone has to provide a baseline of economic theory from which to analyze all these pronouncements and statistics with which we're bombarded, and to counter this terrible orthodoxy which is now basically manifesting itself in pop economics. So maybe theory is the new specialization in economics. And that's really, I think, the role of all of you. We're so thrilled to host you, and we're so appreciative that you're here this weekend with us. Thank you. Peter.
Well, good morning. As Jeff mentioned, Joe Salerno, our Vice President for Academic Affairs and the Master of Ceremonies for the Austrian Economics Research Conference, is not able to be with us this morning. So it's my pleasure to fill in for Joe. I found out this morning that Joe would not be able to be here for the reasons mentioned by Jeff. So I've had about 30 minutes to practice my New Jersey accent and the associated Salerno mannerisms, but I really don't think I can pull it off, so I won't even try. I do want to add my appreciation, add to Jeff's remarks and note my appreciation for Jeff and for the Mises Institute for remaining in a higher state of normalcy over the last year than any other academic organization that I know. Like many of you, I used to travel quite often during sort of normal times to academic conferences and symposia, workshops, and other events, and of course all that came to a grinding halt. As I look back over the last 12 months, I think I've only traveled for professionally 3 times, and all 3 times were to Mises Institute events. The Mises University and Rothbard Graduate Seminar in the summer of 2020, and then an event at Jekyll Island in the fall. And so here I am again on the Mises property, able to engage in something that I truly love, and that's an important part of my identity, which is participating in academic events and hanging out with wonderful people like yourselves. So it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Douglas Rasmussen for our F.A. Hayek Memorial Lecture. And this lecture is sponsored by Greg and Joy Morin, who are here with us this morning. So thank you very much for your kind sponsorship. Doug Rasmussen was a professor of philosophy at St. John's University in New York City for almost 30 years, and he now holds emeritus status at St. John's. He's a senior affiliated scholar with the Institute for Economic Inquiry at Creighton University and a senior scholar for the Institute of Economic Studies in Europe. He's an extremely well-known philosopher in the Thomist tradition. He's authored a number of books, mostly with his longtime colleague, Doug Denial. So Doug and Doug, this will be part of the Doug and Doug show. Those books include Liberty and Nature, an Aristotelian defense of liberal order, Norms of Liberty, a perfectionist basis for non-perfectionist politics, The Perfectionist Turn, and The Realist Turn. He's also co-edited with Tibor Machan an important book on libertarian theory called Liberty for the 21st Century, Contemporary Libertarian Thought. He's authored over 100 articles in anthologies and in journals such as the American Catholic Philosophical Quarterly, the American Philosophical Quarterly, International Philosophical Quarterly, the Journal of Social Philosophy, the New Scholasticism, the Personalist, Public Affairs Quarterly, and many, many other publications. He has served on the steering committee for the Ayn Rand Society and is a member of the Executive Council for the American Catholic Philosophical Association. He's a co-editor with Doug Denial of The Philosophic Thought of Ayn Rand, a very important book published in 1984 that was designed to introduce Ayn Rand's thought to professional academic philosophers. His research areas, his areas of interest, include epistemology, ontology, ethics, and political philosophy, as well as the moral foundations of capitalism. Very important topic for us here. He's currently contributing an essay to a Festschrift that he is editing, and he's assisting in developing a Center for Natural Law and Natural Rights at the University of Bucharest in Romania. He's a contributor to Law and Liberty and a member of the Association of Private Enterprise Education. He also knew Murray Rothbard quite well, and like others, I'm sure has interesting stories to tell about about his interactions with Murray. So, Doug, thank you very much for coming to Auburn, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you so much. I'm both pleased and honored to be here. I have admired the work done by the Mises Institute for many years. As you can see, my topic is Rothbard's account of the axiom of human action, a Neo-Aristotelian defense. This is a topic I have been thinking about for some time. The screen display will provide an outline of my talk, which also includes some important quotations. F.A. Hayek noted, "Nobody can be a great economist who is only an economist." And I'm even tempted to add that the economist who is only an economist is likely to become a nuisance, if not a positive danger. Murray Rothbard understood this truth, and he followed its admonition. He examined questions that pertain to the ultimate ground for economic thinking and was not afraid to note their philosophical dimensions. Murray was fearless. In this regard, Rothbard has famously stated, whether we consider the action axiom a priori or empirical depends on our ultimate philosophical position. My own epistemological position rests on Aristotle and St. Thomas rather than Kant, and hence I would interpret the proposition differently. I would consider the axiom a law of reality rather than a law of thought, and hence empirical rather than a priori. I seek in this lecture to provide a framework for a research agenda for a Neo-Aristotelian-Thomistic explanation and defense of the axiom of human action. Oh, by the way, the terms action axiom and axiom of human action will be used interchangeably in this presentation. The action axiom holds that human action is purposeful behavior. Why is a Neo-Aristotelian-Thomistic explanation and defense of the axiom of human action necessary? Why does it matter? There are at least two reasons. First, it can be seen as a response to the challenge to economic reasoning presented by Amartya Sen in his seminal essay, Rational Fools. This challenge involves an economic point and an ethical point. Second, defending Rothbard's account of the axiom of human action was something that Rothbard told me he wanted to see developed. I can, if asked, discuss Rothbard's request after this presentation. But for now, I will concentrate on Sen's challenge, at least part of it. Amartya Sen argues in Rational Fools that one cannot base an account of human action on the assumption that all human action is self-interested, and that appealing to revealed preferences is tautological and of little or no use for understanding human action. So, limiting one's understanding of human action to consistency in choice behavior is insufficient to explain human action or ground economic theorizing. This is the economic method point. The ethical point is that such a so-called purely economic view of human action makes a human being a bit of a fool and close indeed to a social moron. There is more to human life than utility maximization. Rothbard's response would be, it is not necessary to assume that all human conduct is self-interested. Further, he would endorse Sen's observation, quote, if you are consistent, then, no matter whether you are a single-minded egoist or a raving altruist or a class-conscious militant, you will appear to be maximizing your own utility in this enchanted world of definitions, unquote. To say the least, nominal definitions will not work. They simply avoid or evade the problem. Rather, what is necessary to ground economic explanations is the recognition of the purposeful character of human action. The purposeful character of human action results from the very nature of human beings. This approach does not consider what might be the motives for taking an action, or whether the end of an action is choice-worthy. Rather, it simply focuses on the formal relations between ends and means. The notion of homo agens, as developed in Austrian economics, should replace homo economicus as the foundation for economic theorizing. Rothbard's response to Sen's ethical point would be as follows. Rothbard would indeed agree with Sen that limiting one's understanding to human action to consistency and choice behavior makes a human being a bit of a fool and a social moron. Rothbard's understanding of the action axiom does not entail non-cognitivism in ethics or political philosophy. Not to consider whether one's ends are choice-worthy is not equivalent to claiming that there is no basis for determining whether one's ends are choice-worthy. Further, since Rothbard was an advocate of natural moral law and natural rights, he would argue that homo agens and homo moralis are complementary, not antagonistic accounts of human nature. In this regard, it is worth noting that for Aquinas, the first principle of practical reasoning is good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. This principle does not itself determine the basic goods and virtues of the self-perfecting life, but it does express the end-oriented character of human action. However, since Douglas Denial and I have developed a version of natural moral law and a basis for natural rights elsewhere, I leave a discussion of the complementarity of Rothbard's account of the axiom of human action with natural law and natural rights for another occasion. I will instead concentrate on what would be Rothbard's response to Sen's economic method point. For Rothbard, the claim that human action is purposeful, which he regards as the foundation for economic reasoning, is neither merely an empirical generalization, nor simply a tautology. So for Rothbard's view of the action axiom to work, it must be possible for a proposition, in this case the action axiom, to be both a necessary truth and about reality. The Neo-Aristotelian-Thomistic tradition is noteworthy in this regard because it upholds and defends the claim that there can be necessary truths that pertain to reality. That human action is purposeful is for Rothbard an axiomatic, self-evident, necessary truth. One, it is a self-evident primordial fact that individuals engage in conscious actions toward chosen goals. Two, the action axiom is defended, not proved, via negative demonstration, a dialectical argument in a manner similar to what Aristotle used in defending the principle of non-contradiction. It is used against any would-be denier of the action axiom. Three, This defense shows the self-refuting character of the attempt to deny the action axiom. However, what this argument does not show is A, what grounds the necessary truth of the action axiom, that is, what makes it a necessary truth, and B, why this type of action is necessary to being human. In response, Rothbard states, all human beings act by virtue of their existence and their nature as human beings. We could not conceive of human beings who do not act purposefully, who have no ends in view that they desire and attempt to attain. Things that did not act, that did not behave purposefully, would no longer be classified as human. So, what is it that makes the action axiom a necessary truth and purposive behavior necessary to being human? Answer, the action axiom is a necessary truth because acting purposively is an essential expression of human nature. Purposeful action is necessary to being human. But now, we need to consider more deeply what is involved in this answer. Rothbard is an empiricist about the source of knowledge, yet a rationalist about the justification for knowledge in some cases. He does not think that consulting sense experience precludes grasping what is necessary and universal. Accordingly, he is a direct perceptual realist who holds that what is presented in sense perception is not necessarily recognized by sense perception, and it is thus possible for our senses to carry a message that they themselves cannot interpret. This requires the human intellect to uncover what sense perception presents, so that there is no bifurcation of human knowledge into two kinds, empirical sensory and rational conceptual. Rather, human cognition is empirical and rational, sensory and conceptual. As Rothbard states, I would deny as an Aristotelian and Neo-Thomist any such alleged laws of logical structure that the human mind necessarily imposes on the chaotic structure of reality. Instead, I would call all such laws laws of reality, which the mind apprehends from investigating and collating the facts of the real world. My view is that the fundamental axiom and subsidiary axioms are derived from the experience of reality and are therefore, in the broadest sense, empirical. I would agree with the Aristotelian realist that its doctrine is radically empirical, far more so than the post-Humean empiricism which is dominant in modern philosophy. Rothbard's account of the action axiom is dependent not only on a view of sense perception, but also on a view of conception, and thus abstraction, developed by the Aristotelian-Thomistic tradition. However, there are objections to this view of conception. Locke says abstractions provide only a partial conception of the nature of something. Berkeley denies that we can have abstract ideas. Kant says they cannot be based on sense perception, but only imposed by the human mind. Geach and Sellers have, in the 20th century, made similar charges against abstraction. So, how does Rothbard's Aristotelian-Thomistic view fare against the charge that abstraction falsifies or provides only a partial conception of the nature of things? The classic reply to this charge is that abstraction does not require either falsification or subtraction. It holds that even though our thought must answer to reality if we are to find truth, there is nonetheless a difference between thinking something is thus and so and its being thus and so. Our knowledge must be of reality, but that does not mean that our knowledge is reality. Yet, if the way that things exist in thought is different from the way that things exist apart from their being thought about, then how can we ever avoid falsehood? The answer, of course, depends on the manner in which thought is different from the things that are thought about. But how are we to understand this? Anthony Kinney notes, to think a thing to be otherwise than it is certainly to think falsely. But if all that is meant by thinking a thing other than it is that the way it is with our thinking is different from the way it is with the thing that we are thinking about in its own existence, then there need be no falsehood involved. To think that Henry VIII had no weight is to think a false thought. But there is no falsehood in thinking of Henry VIII without thinking of his weight. Henry VIII could never exist without having some weight or other. But a thought of Henry VIII can certainly exist without any thought at all about his weight. Moreover, there is then a type of thinking that involves considering the form or character of something in an indeterminate manner so that its individual differences are not specified, but are nonetheless regarded as requiring specific determination. For example, the concept human being. And this type of thinking can be contrasted with a type of thinking that separates or excludes specific determinations from the form or character of something. For example, the concept humanity. The first type of thinking is, and this comes from our medieval sources, abstraction without precision. And the second is abstraction with precision. In the case of precision, the form or character is considered as not related to its specific determination. For example, humanity. And for abstraction without precision, the form or character is not considered as related to its specific determination. For example, human being. As Aquinas notes, It is clear then that the essence of man is signified by two terms, man and humanity, but in different ways. The term man expresses it as a whole because it does not prescind from the designation of matter, but contains it implicitly and indistinctly. This is why the term man can be predicated of individuals. But the term humanity signifies the essence as a part, because it includes only what belongs to man as man, prescinding from all designation of matter. As a result, it cannot be predicated of individual men. Thus, we can abstractly consider the form or character, that is, the attributes of individual human beings, say Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and George Bush, without precision. When we do so, we are considering their form or character indeterminately as a conceptual unit or universal, but we know nonetheless that their form or character must have some determination. To abstract in this sense, then, is not to subtract. That is, it is not to reduce one's awareness to part of a being, but to grasp it as a whole. We can say of each of these individuals, they are human beings, but we cannot say of each that they are humanity. To abstract without precision, then, is neither to falsify nor to lessen our apprehension of what is encountered through sense perception. For as said, the form or character, when so considered, is not excluded or cut off from its individual differences, which are treated as implicit. Indeed, this manner of abstraction enhances our apprehension and allows us to discover what human beings essentially are. Rothbard's view of the action axiom depends on abstraction without precision. It does not positively exclude individual differences of individual human beings, but instead treats these differences as implicit. These differences only become explicit when each instance of what is signified by the concept human being is considered. For example, Obama, Trump, or Bush. What is common to these individuals must be expressed determinately in their concrete forms or characters of these individuals. We thus can say what is common to human beings and thus speak of human nature without either turning human nature into a universal part of individual human beings or treating abstraction as a process of subtraction. It is from our conceptual grasp of human nature that the axiom of human action is justified. One does not need to consult future experience to justify this claim, because one is speaking of a certain kind of being and how it acts. One is not making an inference from some to all, but moving from a conceptual awareness of the nature of one thing to other instances of that same nature. Whatever pertains to a human being according to his or her nature will also be true of every individual with that same nature. There is then no principal difficulty in the action axiom being empirically known and being necessarily true, because the process of abstraction without precision allows the natures of the things to determine what a concept signifies. What a concept signifies involves both an intention, which is not limited to what is only explicitly considered or what is stated in a definition, and an extension that applies to all individuals that are instances of a certain kind, be they past, present, or future. The basic principle here is that all natures are individualized and all individuals are natured. This approach rejects the view that the axiom of human action and the principles that result from it are merely empirical generalizations. This approach offers a basic alternative to contemporary accounts of this axiom. It provides the basis for applying economic principles to human actions we observe so as to understand what is happening and why. Or to put it in a slightly different manner, and as will be noted towards the end of these remarks, this approach provides a way for the economist not to get lost in the so-called empirical data. Rothbard holds that the axiom of human action is not only empirical and a priori, but also a self-evident necessary truth. What is crucial to grasp here is that the self-contradictory character of denying that human action is purposeful is based not on an appeal to what one can or cannot imagine or conceive, a la some criterion in one's mind, but instead on what is known about human beings and their conduct. One does not know what is true, or even necessarily true, or possible, or impossible, via some process of inspectio mentis, but rather by the apprehension of a reality that exists and is what it is apart from our cognition. Most importantly in this regard, Rothbard's account of the axiom of human action depends on the Aristotelian-Thomistic rejection of the central epistemological assumption of so much modern empiricist and rationalist thought, namely rejecting that percepts and concepts are the immediate and direct objects of cognition, and holding instead that they are only that by which we know. Rothbard's account of the action axiom is based on the insight that the basic tools of human cognition, from percepts to concepts to propositions to arguments to theories, have an inherently relational or intentional character. Their nature is not merely explained by reference to something else. Their nature is a reference, a respect, an ordination to something else. Hence, the tools of human cognition cannot be known first and for themselves without there first being at least a logically prior cognition of something other than themselves. It is thus not possible to hold that all awareness is, at the very beginning and to the very end, enclosed within itself, as if it were one's private picture show or language. The so-called way of ideas is a non-starter. Sometimes it is argued that to claim that we can know necessary truths requires that we hold that human beings are infallible. But this is not the case. Three observations are important in this regard. First, being aware that you may be mistaken doesn't mean that you are aware that you are a fallible human being. It means that you have a concrete reason to suppose that you may be mistaken in this case. Second, fallibilism and necessity are perfectly compatible. Fallibilism is a thesis about our liability to error, not a thesis about the modal status, possible falsity, of what we believe. Third, it is indeed odd to what extent it is generally supposed that any recognition of essences in things, coupled as it is with a logic of what statements and necessary truths about the world, must inevitably bring in its train an extreme dogmatism, claiming an absolute certainty for its pronouncements on what is necessarily the case. However, neither essentialism in philosophy nor the what logic that is associated with it necessarily involves any such pretensions to infallibility in knowledge. So, one need not claim infallibility to hold an extreme dogmatism in order to hold that the axiom of human action is a necessary truth. Also, there is no need to interpret fallibilism so strongly that it conflicts with holding that the axiom is a necessary truth. Rothbard claims that the axiom of human action is grounded in human nature. How does this work? Let us begin by considering the real definition. The real definition of human being states in brief what is signified by the natural kind term, human being. It notes the overall limits of human nature, and it is like a title on a file folder that directs and sorts one's investigations, though it does not state all the characteristics of human nature. The real definition per genus et differentium of a human being is rational animal. This defines the nature of a human being. The genus of the real definition is animal, and so everything that is true of being an animal is also true of a human being. So a human being is also living, sentient, individual, and entitative. Moreover, what is true of each of these considerations is true as well of a human being. For example, being entitative involves space and time. The differentium, rationality, is determined not only by reference to what differentiates a human being from other animals, but by what does so most fundamentally. That is, it is the feature upon which the other necessary features are dependent. A human being is rational. This means human beings have a distinctive faculty of awareness. Humans have a conceptual capacity. Such a capacity fundamentally involves the power to grasp the world in conceptual terms. That is to say, the power to form classifications, develop theories, formulate hypotheses, come to judgments, derive conclusions, reflect on various subjects, be they past, present, or future, make evaluations, develop purposes, and plan actions. This capacity is expressed in speculative reasoning, the pursuit of truth, and practical reasoning, the pursuit of human good. It is manifested in our language as well as in our development of culture and conventions, and indeed in those practices that constitute what could be called forms of life. Rationality, understood broadly as a conceptual capacity, is the fundamental modality by which human beings consider and take on the issues of human life. It is the fundamental operating feature of the human life form or nature. Let us now consider three statements by Rothbard that illustrate this view of human nature. Human beings possess a rational consciousness. Stones, molecules, planets cannot choose their courses. Their behavior is strictly and mechanically determined for them. Only human beings possess free will and consciousness, for they are conscious and they can and indeed must choose their course of action. To ignore this primordial fact about the nature of man, to ignore his volition, his free will, is to misconstrue the facts of reality and therefore to be profoundly and radically unscientific. The fundamental axiom, then, for the study of man is the existence of individual consciousness. Not being omniscient, a man must learn. He must ever adopt ideas and act upon them, choosing ends and the means to attain these ends. The true science of man bases itself upon the existence of individual human beings, upon individual life and consciousness. The true science of man concentrates on the individual as of central, epistemological, and ethical importance. In these passages, Rothbard is appealing to an array of facts that pertain to the natures of human beings. This knowledge is based on sense perception, but it is not the result of any special experience or experiment. Instead, it is based on general experience that nearly everyone possesses. Rothbard is also following Aquinas in linking free will and rational consciousness. For as Aquinas states, man is master of his actions through his reason and will, whence too the free will is defined as the faculty and will of reason, unquote. Self-direction and the exercise of reason are not separate acts of two isolated capacities, but distinct aspects of the same conscious act. Human reason is, in its very essence, a self-directed activity. Rothbard is thus endorsing the idea of agent causation. The character of the explanation and defense of the axiom of human action offered here is not merely a case of a rationalistic unpacking of the meaning of the concept human being, as if it were some private internal repository of knowledge or an isolated atom of meaning. Nor is it trying to deduce the axiom of human action from the definition of a human being. Strictly speaking, concepts, and indeed definitions, do not have meanings. Rather, they are meanings. Their proper and ultimate nature consists in being of or about something other than themselves. So it is always to reality that we must look first in understanding what Rothbard is saying about the action axiom. Finally, and most importantly, Rothbard's account requires recognizing that as living things, human beings are teleological beings that cannot be understood for what they are, apart from the fact that their human reason and volition, and thus human action, are end-oriented. Humans have no choice either about being end-oriented or about the need to choose ends. Nor indeed do they have any choice about whether reason is to be employed to attain worthwhile lives. Humans must direct their reason to both understand the world and achieve various ends or goals they think worthy of pursuit. Fundamentally, humans have no choice about what they essentially are. And it is upon that fact that the axiom of human action rests. As Rothbard states, man's necessity to choose means that at any given time he is acting to bring about some end in the immediate or distant future. That is, that he has purposes. The steps he takes to achieve his ends are his means. Man is born with no innate knowledge of what ends to choose or how to use which means to achieve them. Having no inborn knowledge of how to survive and prosper, he must learn what ends and means to adopt. And he's liable to make errors along the way. But only his reasoning mind can show him his goals and how to attain them. This is what the action axiom involves, and it is the starting point for economic theory. The importance of the action axiom in providing the foundation for a theoretical approach to economics, particularly to price theory, was brought home in a recent Wall Street Journal article by Professor Alex Salter of Texas Tech University, who said, "The atheoretical approach of contemporary economists makes them particularly susceptible to the technocratic pretensions of the center-left. If, contrary to the claims of price theory, there are no enduring laws of economics, then there is no reason to stop the technocrats from tinkering. Many of these economists don't realize that they are being politically compromised. They see it as just the facts ma'am pragmatism. In reality, it is ideology sneaking in through the back door." Regardless of how the justification of the rest of the propositions of praxeology and economic theorizing might be fair, regardless of how we go on and try to consider the application of economic principles to particular situations. Rothbard's account of the axiom of human action, when explained and defended in Neo-Aristotelian-Thomistic terms, provides a viable and powerful alternative to positivist, constructivist, and neo-pragmatist accounts. It allows for the possibility that there are economic laws, not merely empirical generalizations, and that these laws are necessary truths reflective of reality and are thus not merely tautologies or human constructs. It is an account that economic theory desperately needs. And as I think of it, it is an account that philosophy desperately needs. No, as I think of it, it is an account our culture desperately needs. And here are some references. Thanks so much. Yeah, right. Let me say something here. I'll take a Q&A in a minute. I just want to say something more. I mentioned that Murray had requested that someone take up the argument. This happened during a series of conversations I had with him in the early 1980s. I was a young assistant professor at St. John's in 1981, and I got invited to some cocktail parties and other things. One of the meetings was at Joe Peden's apartment. Joe Peden was a good friend of Murray Rothbard. He was a professor of history at Baruch College. And Peden had introduced Rothbard to my mentor, Henry Babcock Veitch, the eminent Neo-Aristotelian scholar. And Henry and Rothbard and Joey and Janie, that's Janie Veitch, we talked about all sorts of issues and all of that. And there was a lot of understanding that there could be a Neo-Aristotelian defense of this. Rothbard, of course, was enthused about this because he had offered that in 1957. And I should add that the fine hand of Leonard Liggio, I think, was behind manipulating things so that everybody was meeting everybody, if you know what Leonard did, and all of that. And of course, but of course, Murray was the type of guy, this is both his greatness and a weakness. He says, well, do you think you can get this out tomorrow? Now, my doctoral dissertation was on logical possibility and necessary truth, the viewpoint from an intentional with a T logic. Okay, that was my doctoral dissertation. I spent a lot of my life working on natural law, natural rights, you know about that, blah, blah, blah. But this has been always been something that I've cared about. The reference up here shows you some of the work that I've been doing on this for years. And it's been something that I've cared about. But I've also thought of myself as really carrying Murray's torch. Because I love Murray's approach to Austrian economics. One, because of his commitment to realism. Two, because he absolutely understands the importance of there being moral knowledge, that natural moral law has a point, and that natural rights are absolutely crucial. What I find so sad about contemporary classical liberal libertarian land among many of the so-called libertarian philosophers today is that they assume they can ignore such basic questions as this. As Aristotle said, an initial deviation from the truth is multiplied later 1,000-fold. And Murray understood this. Murray was a radical in the sense that you go after the root, you go after the foundations. So I'm personally happy to get a chance to present this. I wanted to say that. Okay, Q&A.
Well, first, please join me in thanking Dr. Davis. We do have time for just a few questions. If you would please raise your hand. We have a microphone that will be brought to you so everyone can hear.
I don't see why it's so important to distinguish between humans and animals from a praxeological point of view. Animals use means to achieve ends, and humans have a broad range of cognitive capacity such that it's hard to defend the claim that only humans have consciousness, or that that's the distinctive feature.
I guess my answer would be is we're talking about a particular type of consciousness. Certainly there's some kind of means-end reasoning or going on with some animals in some cases, but I'm still waiting for Flipper to say, you know what I'm going to say now. All porpoises are mortal. Flipper is a porpoise. Therefore, Flipper is mortal. I think there's a wealth of things that we do that other critters don't do. One of the things I know they do is they don't have discussions of praxeology and the nature of praxeology. It is, though, an important question to talk about, and I will say, and this is, of course, the mercenary in me, that I do discuss this with Doug Denial, and I do discuss this particular question in part of our new book, The Realist's Turn. And so you can always look at that more that way. But I mean, that's an important question.
I look forward to the next article on purposeful human action. Where's David Gordon? This is for you.
No, you've been running around with him way too much.
Other questions?
Yeah, you made the statement, what seems to me to say that human beings are born with their mind as a blank slate.
Microphone.
Yeah, the tabula rasa doctrine.
Yeah, and that sort of disturbs me, and that seems to open the door to a whole lot of things, including postmodernism. And I know that's not where you want to go.
I don't see how you go from that to that. Because what we're talking about when we're talking about a blank slate is the medieval maxim is nothing is in the intellect that's not first in the senses. And so all our knowledge comes from sense perception. Okay, and so that's what, to use the old metaphor, that's what's written upon the slate. To say that is not to say that human beings are not endowed with a certain DNA, a certain set of capacities, a certain set of proclivities, needs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What I find present in postmodernism is the assumption that what something is determined by one's ideology, one's race, one's culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Postmodernism is really the antithesis of the type of view that's being presented here. And postmodernism would want to say that would say just the opposite. Postmodernism would say what is in sense perception is a result of opinions and thoughts or the ways that we've been trained. So there was this cartoon called, I think the cartoon was called, is it a cartoon called Non Sequitur? It's got a guy, two cavemen sitting inside the cave, and they're looking outside, and one goes, "Ugh, raining." The other one goes, "No, it's not." And the guy says, "Well, go outside." Goes out and says, "Ugh, not raining." And the guy goes, "Hey, it's wet." And he goes, "What do you mean by wet?" Okay, and so the title of the cartoon was The Birth of Ideology. And, that there's nothing given to us, okay, from the start. And it's given to us in sense perception and in our capacities. Now, how that came about, the evolutionary story, the metaphysical story, the physical story, the theological story, that's all important. I mean, one of the more interesting things is, one man's modus ponens is another man's modus tollens, you know that. If such and such is the case, then there's a God. Well, therefore, but there is no God. Therefore, you can't have such and such as the case. But you could say such and such is the case. This follows. Therefore, God. You can work it around the other way. And so, I think it's very important when we start talking about human nature, not to confine ourselves to the so-called empirical methods that we're confronted with today. I'm not against experiments, I'm not against science, et cetera, but I think it's a much broader thing. Anyway. Thank you. Thank you for the question. It was a good question. All of this, by the way, remember I was smart enough to say I'm providing a framework for a research agenda. Every one of these topics is multiple works on that, as you can see. And what I'm trying to do is provide an orientation for how we think about the foundation for Austrian economics. Yeah.
Question for you on the nature of Rothbard as Thomist. Given that Thomas holds the state is necessary and ordained by God, how do we square Rothbard's, let's say, anarchism with that?
Well, I think Murray wanted to use all the available premises that he could to get to his conclusion. Okay, so saying that he wants to use the epistemological, ontological, ethical foundations is one thing. Saying you want to endorse the state's another thing. But still, there's still a lot of problems here to be unwrapped. For example, when natural law theorists talk about polis, for example, for where we get the word political, there's two meanings to the word polis in Aristotle. One is society and one is state. And regrettably, they're conflated all over the place in Aristotle, which inhabits almost all political philosophy today. When we say we're political animals, does that mean I'm a creature of the state, or does it mean I'm social, et cetera, et cetera? All of that's always confused. And I'm not sure how well all of that is distinguished in later Thomistic thought about politics and all of that. But I mean, you don't have to buy the entire project of Aquinas, even though I'll have to say, after years and years of looking at Aquinas and being, what shall I say, a doubter about fundamental things, Aquinas, it changes you. I guess it's the thing is, what I'm realizing that a lot of times what I read 30 years ago, I wasn't ready to read. And now I've either been kicked in the teeth enough or learned enough or something that I say, oh, now I get it. That's why the volumes of Plato or other, you go through it more than once. And so thinking about, just a side comment about thinking about all things Thomistic, it's worth our investigation much more, even though there's lots of good infighting in that tradition, et cetera. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for a terrific talk. We have a 15-minute break, but before we break, I've been asked to remind you that if you drove to the Institute, please make sure that your vehicle is parked on the Institute property and not in the parking lot of one of the surrounding apartment complexes or an Auburn University parking lot, because apparently they are ticketing and towing vehicles that are parked places where they shouldn't be parked. So there's plenty of room in the front and back parking lots here at the Institute, so please make sure that your vehicle is safe and secure on our private property. Thank you.